Welcome to everyone who's joining now. We're going to wait a few minutes to give some folks some time to join. Though while we wait, feel free to drop your name, where you're calling in from, and your pronouns if you'd like into the chat.
I don't hear any sound.
We have Tracy from Columbus on the call. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Brittany from Cleveland.
Myself?
Oh no, I was saying anyone can drop their names into the chat as well as like where they're calling in from. You can say it out loud too. You don't have to just do it in the chat.
Canton area, Maslin.
Awesome. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the lighting isn't good.
Achilles is calling in from Elyria. Cool. Also Randy from Columbus. We're going to give people a couple more minutes to filter in and then we'll get started.
Right. Sure. I was on the webinar a couple weeks ago.
Oh, awesome. Was that
yeah.
the Repeal House Bill 6 one or the
Yeah,
Teletown Hall?
that one.
Okay.
Yeah, that one.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming to the other one.
It was interesting. I had read the whole session stuff in the Canton repository.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Full coverage of it. Okay.
Well, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for coming to this first stop of the Ohio Equity Team's virtual Equitable Energy Tour. On today's meeting, our energy needs today and tomorrow. A couple just technical things about Zoom. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have questions, but also you can drop your questions into the chat and we'll get to them as they pop up. And then I'm Anastazia Vanisko. I'm the Cleveland Program Director with Ohio Citizen Action, and I'm going to be moderating the discussion today. A little bit about the Ohio Equity Team who put this event together. It's a group that was created to assure that all communities, regardless of economic, socioeconomic, demographic, or other identifying characteristics, have access to and are provided with clean, healthy, safe, and sustainable air and water. Their work places an emphasis on improving environmental quality and public health in historically marginalized communities that often suffer the poorest air and water quality due to systemic oppression. Originally, this tour was planned out as in-person meetings in cities and towns across Ohio, but because of the pandemic, it's been restructured so that we can still have these conversations even if we can't have them in person. And we're all really incredibly grateful that you found the time to be with us this evening, despite these hectic times that we find ourselves in. And then our speakers this evening include SeMia Brae from Black Environmental Leaders, Kim Foreman, the Executive Director of Environmental Health Watch, and Achilles Morales, who is the co-chair of the Ohio Equity Team. And before we dive into the speakers, we do want to hear from you all and just hear a little bit about how you see energy policy impacting your daily life, whether or not that's maybe the health of yourself or people in your community. It could be the size of your utility bills, really anything that impacts you on a daily basis. And feel free to either share that out loud or drop that into the chat.
Okay, I'll say something.
Okay.
Okay, I'm all for renewable energy. Don't understand why the coal industry should have any foot in Ohio at all, especially in Indiana. And I don't know very much about what kind of initiatives have been undertaken, although I did hear something about the Cincinnati area, a man down there who had the capabilities to get going on a lot of stuff, and the state basically was blocking him from doing that. So I really don't know much about what is going on in the direction of renewable energy. All I hear is how much is being done to block a lot of it. So I really would like to get some more information, even though I do read as much as I can find to read. Because I go out west in the winter, in the snowbird, and of course I see all the turbines out there and renewable energy going on out there, and it seems odd that we're so tied to the coal industry now. So, you know, it's, even though I know it's jobs, but there could be so many jobs created for the future in renewable energy. I can't understand that, except for, well, of course, what I read, you know, what I have to read, and what's directing it, you know. So I'm interested in knowing what initiatives are being taken, what honestly is going on going forward a year or two or three. I really, really would like to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that SeMia is going to talk a little bit later about how like clean energy can contribute to like the wealth within our communities too. And for folks who just hopped on, we're just folks are either just saying out loud or dropping into the chat on the ways that you see energy policy impacting you on your daily life or the people around you. And one thing that I want to talk about that is an immediate impact that's kind of coming up is that right now people are feeling some pressure from impending utility shutoffs depending where you live. And what we've seen, you know, because of Ohio's continued investment in older and dirtier, inefficient energy sources like coal, is that it's continued to drive up our energy prices over the years, which is now worsening this impending crisis of people not being able to pay their utility bills during the current economic crisis we find ourselves in. And Ohio did have a voluntary shutoff moratorium for energy companies, but that's no longer in place, and some places are starting to recommence shutoffs. So for like those of us who are up in Cleveland, it's really just depends on who your utility is and the municipality you live in. For example, Cleveland Public Power is going to maintain their shutoff moratorium, but if you have First Energy and have the illuminating company, they're going to recommence shutoffs starting October 15th. So we did want to take some time to refer people to resources if either yourself or someone you know is struggling to pay their bills. So you can go to reach out to the Cleveland Housing Network or CHN, and they can help you if you've either gotten a disconnection notice or if you have overdue bills. And they aren't doing in-person appointments right now, but you can call 216-350-8008 or go to chn.itfrontdesk.com to make an appointment with them. And I'll drop that into the chat as well. We just wanted to note that that's something that is available to people if they're struggling or if you know someone who's struggling. And I see in the chat too, some folks dropped some ways that they see energy policy impacting their lives. So Rachel Bell says that the fact we don't have a comprehensive energy policy in Ohio means that utilities can keep coming to us as their customers to pay for everything. And that now that's really, we couldn't afford it before the pandemic, and now that's making it even more difficult for people to pay. And Angela Oster says that we're captive as ratepayers to these monopolies, and we should have more of a say in where we get our energy. Totally right.
Definitely.
Yeah. And now I'm going to pass it to some of our speakers, and I wanted to remind people as questions pop up, feel free to drop those into the chat, even as our speakers are sharing their knowledge. And SeMia is coming to us from the Black Environmental Leaders. She's a strategic business consultant and thought leader here in Cleveland, with a passion for cross-sector knowledge exchange and facilitating real conversations that engage our leaders in innovative thinking. So I'm going to pass it off to her.
It helps when I'm off mute. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Anastazia. Good evening, I'm SeMia Brae, and tonight I would like to begin by acknowledging the Illinois tribe, the Iroquois, the Chippewa, Delaware, Erie, Ottawa, Potawatomi, Kickapoo, Kaskaskia, Miami, Huron, Wyandot, and Shawnee people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respect to their elders, past and present, as I elect to help redefine how people place themselves in relation to our first peoples. My comments to you tonight are a result of a legacy inherited from my grandparents. You see, in the early 60s, they used their democratic agency at a time when they could not vote and migrated from the Jim Crow South to Northeast Ohio. So I'm the member of the first generation in my family born with the right to vote. It is their vision, their courage, and their strength that inspires me to do this work at the intersection of democracy, equity, and the environment. As a consultant, I get to work with some really innovative organizations in the renewable and clean energy space. One of them, as Anastazia spoke about, is Black Environmental Leaders Association. This group, founded in Northeast Ohio, is represented by leaders who stand as stewards of the natural and built environment through collaboration and partnership, raising awareness and advocating for environmental and economic justice. Together, they are informing policy and programming within all sectors of the green economy. The members of the Black Environmental Leaders and their allies understand that when people come together for a purpose, like we're doing tonight, like our interest in the environment, climate change, and equity, that brings them into the same room, even if it's virtual. And it's our collective humanity that fuels and sustains our journey together. So tonight they've asked me to kind of speak toward energy and well-being. So I'd like to say right now, if you would join me in doing something that I think is very key to our environment, and that is taking a breath. So if you join me right now, and we all just because as we think about well-being and we think about energy, it really starts right there. My dad taught me at a very young age that which is seemingly the weakest in us is actually that which gives us our most strength. That is our breath and our heartbeat, two things that we take for granted every single day. But in fact, as we breathe in, we bring in oxygen, and as we breathe out carbon dioxide. And that is what comes to us from all the plants, the trees, and the energy of the sunlight that through this process gives us what we need, and we in fact provide the trees what they need. So what does this have to do with climate change? Greenhouse gases and CO2 is one of the far-ranging environmental, is one that is causing a lot of the climate change. It's trapping the heat, and that's causing all of the problems, or many of the problems, that we're starting to experience today. Things like excessive heat, extreme weather, food supply disruptions, increased wildfires that we're all hearing about, and other harmful effects of these greenhouse gases. So our challenge is to find balance. And in finding that balance of those carbon emissions, along with the natural processes, for all those things that we like doing, like driving our cars and going on vacation and lighting our homes, all of those things have gotten that balance off balance. So in the past, what we've done is we've focused primarily on these fossil fuels. Those are those natural fuels like coal and oil and gas that one of our guests was just talking about. Those are all things that come from our geological past, and they're the remains of living organisms. but it can take thousands, even millions of years for them to replenish, and they are not renewable, and they harm our environment. On the other hand, renewables, which we're talking about tonight, these are environmentally safer, and they produce power through solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal, in some ways, biomass. They are renewable, and they produce less carbon dioxide. So across the globe, there is a race for renewable energy. And we actually, believe it or not, have passed that turning point. The world is now adding more capacity to renewable power each year than coal, natural gas, and oil combined. And some believe there's no going back. In 2013, the world added 143 gigabytes of renewable electricity capacity compared to 141 gigabytes from new plants that burn fossil fuels. As this shift continues to accelerate, and by 2030, it is estimated that more than 4 times as much renewable capacity will be added. So what does that mean for us in Ohio? Well, as some of you have already spoken about, in Ohio, unfortunately, we still have a long ways to go. But there are several resources that are available. One is Power Clean Future Ohio. Power Clean Future Ohio is building momentum now for a clean, prosperous future. So I heard one of our guests say, I don't know where to get the information. One of those places that you can go is Power Clean Future Ohio. They are equipping local leaders for equitable, community-driven carbon reduction in Ohio. They are leading a concerted effort to create equitable economic future powered by clean energy and a viable path for economic growth and more clean energy in our state. Another group is Black environmental leaders who seeks to advocate, incubate, and inform. And so as we think about well-being, I'll end where I started, and that is with a breath. Every time we take a breath, we participate in that process of creating carbon dioxide and ingesting oxygen. It is literally our very breath. So as we think about well-being, we think about in our discussion tonight, and I hope our discussion will be robust, is it's so important that we increase our renewables because the rest of the world is. And it's important that Ohio not be left behind.
Thank you for that, SeMia. Yeah, there's so many times that I realize I just need to breathe more often. So thank you for that. Really appreciate that. And then our next speaker is going to be Kim Foreman. She is the executive director of the Environmental Health Watch here in Cleveland. And during her time there, she has focused on environmental justice issues and adverse outcomes of environmental exposure, both indoors and outdoors, that disproportionately impact poor and minority communities. During her 20 plus years with Environmental Health Watch, she's developed, implemented, and managed various local direct service on the ground grassroots projects, worked on national projects, and spoken at local and national conventions. I'm going to pass it over to Kim now, and I want to remind folks that you can drop your questions into the chat, and we'll also have time for questions and more discussion after our speakers. Take it away, Kim.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. I appreciate everyone joining tonight. Our approach to clean energy and health, I was asked to speak on that, is really focused on the indoor environment. And we have 2 sides to our programming: Healthy Homes, right? We focus on asthma, lead hazards, indoor air quality. A lot of our vulnerable populations spend 90% of their time indoors, not very mobile, but we also don't want to fix the inside and then they walk outside and have been exposed to all this dirty air either. We also have a sustainable community side. And so the way that we and I specifically have approached working on sustainability, climate change, different ways to connect people to policy and how it's relatable to the quality of their life, right? So we have a lot of folks who are impacted by these issues, but could be disconnected from the policy efforts. So the last few years, I've been really spending a lot of time trying to connect people with decision making and policy change so they can participate in these type of efforts. But oftentimes, those who are most impacted are a little disconnected from the conversation. And we want to bridge that, but we also work on practical applications, right? So we do research, but the direct service and the research and the policy intersect. So I'm gonna highlight a few approaches that we've done on the ground to impact the health and the quality of life of people in communities, particular communities of color, low-income communities in the city of Cleveland. So one project we did was called a Deep Energy Retrofits from 2010 to 2013. And so that was, we retrofitted properties and wrapped them and insulated them, right? So our approach was, let's make the envelope tight and put an exchange system in, take out the furnace, right, before we would put on solar panels, for example, right? So I think that our approach is really looking at the house as a system. So we work specifically in like Buckeye and Glenville neighborhoods on existing structures. And we were pushing health with this conversation around affordable green building, affordability was at the core what we were trying to accomplish. So we ended up with the 97% reduction in heating use and overall 73% reduction in energy use. And so with that, it came with a $680 a year in cost savings for those living in those properties, right? I did some follow-up conversations with the residents living in those properties. Some were leasing to own. Some had paid $10 a month, right, for heat. So it's a disconnect if I'm getting a percentage of income and I'm paying $10 a month for my heat. I have no incentive to reduce my usage. So that was kind of something we need to work on in regards to policy and arrearages. And at some point, I'm a tenant, but I might want to be a homeowner. What happens to our arrearages? Who foots the bill on those arrearages? And how do we incentivize reduction in energy use? So we looked at the housing as a way to try to reduce and impact climate change that way. I want to revisit that approach and look at deep energy retrofits in double units, promoting home ownership, affordability. You reduce the cost of utilities for families so then they have more money in their pockets, right? So that's something I'm looking forward to promoting and thinking about revisiting as a mitigation strategy, education, affordability, right? Quality of life and health all kind of rolled into that approach. But I would love to see connected to that solar, community solar, right? Then how do we reduce them, get them off the grid and implement a community solar project? So to me, that has a lot to do with land use, land ownership, who owns the land, and how do we shift some of that power so that we can start to implement some of these ideas and development ideas with a people-centered community development approach where the residents who are impacted have say in it, and also connect them to the policy changes necessary so they can work on these type of climate change mitigation strategies in their communities. Another area that we are working on the ground and have worked on is around the food issue, right? Food, climate, health, they all intersect. What I did was I started around 2012 working on vegan and vegetarian cooking classes. Because if we reduce the meat, it has an impact on climate, the meat production and all that. So these are practical ways that we put this together that would resonate with people that are impacted. Our chefs were people of color. The food they could recognize, but we didn't serve meat. I still don't. Like in a lot of my meetings, I just kind of promote this idea, and I gotta do a better job of narrative around the climate connection, but it is a way to look at what we're doing behavior wise, promoting healthier lifestyles, quality of life, and also having a strategy to reduce the impact on the climate. And so most recently, we have a food cooperative project, planning project, so then we can focus on local foods, locally sourced food, and also economic justice strategies, right? So we want this idea around policy, workforce, and then how does this benefit communities that are impacted? How does connecting them to this policy help them in their communities and their quality of life? And so we have to kind of make the case. And so these direct programs and work that we doing in communities around being environmental stewards and things like that help make the case so they can participate in pushing the policy changes that we need for healthier, safer communities and more affordability around housing and utilities and things like that. So with the COVID-19 crisis, I think social cohesion is another area around climate and how we are disconnected from each other. So through COVID-19, my team that worked on that's working on a food co-op, they started delivering food to families. So I think it's important to understand that if we don't know, we have a crisis now. If we have a climate crisis, where are people living? Who doesn't have transportation? Who needs food, right? Those are things that are really important to understand how we then assist vulnerable communities who might not be as mobile, but now we have a network, unfortunately, through COVID-19, and a team that was really focused on food and how this can then translate to a way to service, a way to support if we did have some other type of crisis. So I think we need to connect the dots for people and then bridge them to these type of efforts and what does it mean for them? Practical application, what does it mean for their quality of life and their health? Because definitely people of color are suffering the most from all of these different impacts. So I think that's all I had to say about that. I have more, but I'll shut up now because I think I went on.
Well, thanks for sharing so much about the work that you're doing. Really appreciate it. And then Angela asks for you, Kim, how supportive is the city of Cleveland with the work that you're doing?
Well, I don't want to shift the conversation, but you need to read up on the Live Safe Cleveland Coalition. I'm the administrator for the Live Safe Resource Center now. We have a new policy in the city of Cleveland for landlords to submit certifications for their rental properties. So we're working hand in hand with the city of Cleveland. The coalition is a community-driven coalition though, but I can talk about that more offline or whatever, but we're working together.
Awesome. And then our final speaker tonight is going to be Achilles Morales. Achilles serves as the co-chair of the Ohio Equity Team, and he's also the co-creator of the Ohio Equity Team's Voting Ambassadors program. He's going to share a little bit more about the Equity Team's work.
Thank you, Anastasia, for that introduction, and good evening, everyone. It's an exciting conversation to be a part of tonight, so I'm really excited to be here. And the Ohio Equity Team is really fighting for all of Ohioans, especially Ohioans in underrepresented communities, to have access to clean air and safe drinking water. And we also understand that being able to get there, we also have to ensure everybody's access to the right to vote, especially our historically marginalized communities. If we're not making sure that they're a part of the voting process, that our communities have access to be able to vote and are not turned away at the polls, then it'll be harder for us to push policy and make sure that the communities who are suffering and dealing with the disasters of climate change are really getting the help. So we have created our Voting Ambassador program over the summer to really engage all Ohioans from across the state to find their voice and make sure that their communities are registered to vote, and also focused on making sure that our underrepresented communities are educated about the voting process, understand how to apply for an absentee ballot. Many of our communities, just speaking personally that I work in here in Lorain County, I don't do that often. So making sure that people are ready and have already sent those in has been a really big push for us, on top of understanding all the deadlines. So I quickly want to go over all the deadlines so that we are all ready for that. But we are 33 days away from the election. We're 4 days away from the voter registration deadline, and we're 5 days away from early voting. So if you haven't checked your voter registration status and you feel confident, I would really encourage you to go to voteohio.gov and just double check your voter registration status, because we just want to make sure. It's a super important election for us. And also I want to encourage you to join our volunteer team. We have weekly meetings that are also trainings. So if you're interested in doing this last push for voter registration, or really focus on getting commitments to vote so we can continue to reach out to our communities through the month of October and make sure that they are early voting or submitting an absentee ballot, please don't hesitate to email us. We want more people. We want to be able to engage you and answer any questions you might have. I will drop our email in the chat because it's a little lengthy, but our email is askohequityteam at gmail.com. And we'll provide you all of the links to sign up to do a training with us, or make sure that you have any information that you need. We're also going to be participating in a election protection workshop and training. We don't have the date yet, but if that is something that you're interested in, and just making sure that our communities are protected when they're voting and getting that information, please email us as well, and we can get you that date. Sorry, I'm looking at, I just got the chat from Lynn. Does anyone have your voter registrations? I don't believe if you early vote that your address needs to match your ID. So you should be okay here in the state of Ohio. What else? I think that was all of what I had to share. Anyone who wants to volunteer with us, we're also making sure that if you're going out to like a food pantry, for example, I've gone to a school district's mobile food pantry here where there's like 500 cars that drive through this food pantry. We all want to be wearing masks and making sure that we're safe. So we also are making sure that our volunteers get a mask that says vote November 3rd. Yeah, that's just something that we're giving away to make sure that you're safe as well. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Our next training is on October 7th at 6 p.m. and we do everything by Zoom. So we're just here to assist in any way and make sure that everybody's ready to vote. And as our equity team goes through the election, we will have more events like the one this evening planned for 2021. So I'm excited to have everybody here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Achilles. And I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. So as a reminder, you can either drop your questions directly into the chat, or you can go ahead and just ask it out loud. And then Kim noted in the chat that the city of Cleveland allocated $5 million to the Coalition Loan Fund for the Lead Safe Resource Center and resources for homeowners and landlords to make homes more lead safe. Like to hear that. That's good.
I'm Lynn.
Sorry, Lynn, you're a little quiet. If you have a question, could you speak up a little bit or get closer to your microphone?
Is this working?
Yes, I hear you now.
I'm from Cincinnati. I'm just dropping in to see what's going on, and I just wanted to make a comment that DeWine actually passed some money to fund the lead pipe replacement in Cincinnati daycares. So that's a really huge thing. How do we keep doing things like that? How do we promote that more? Because that's really concerning. They found almost 200 daycare facilities that had lead pipes still. These are kids.
I'm on the task force, but it was coming to an end for the governor. And I guess I was sitting on the task force, and because of COVID, it kind of stopped. But I was more interested in promoting the funding for infrastructure. When we talk about lead and pipes and water, we need dollars for infrastructure. And so on our policy team, we do have a specific committee on daycares and things like that. So I don't know, I would like to extend that relationship with the governor, but I don't know, we'll see, to get, you know, more in depth of things that we need on the ground to come from the state.
Can you guys hear me? I have a question, possibly for Kim, but anybody that wants to speak to this. Kimberly mentioned the disconnect between some of the people who have the most skin in the game with some of these issues. And I'm very interested on techniques that she has found successful in connecting people that way.
Well, I'll go ahead. Over the last 2-3 years, I've been working with residents, and I've done 3 cohorts of policy and advocacy classes, meaning it's like a 5-week commitment, really getting down to decision making. We will continue to do this work through the Joyce Foundation next year, and connecting concerned citizens to this opportunity to take policy and advocacy classes. We shorten them to 4 hours, but then we do civic engagement. I think that a lot of folks just don't understand how decisions are getting made. And so we have to start there. I evolved all the time, but I think this a point important for me to get folks more involved in the policy advocacy, creating their own advocacy agendas, and then understanding how things work, so then they can be more engaged in the process and not just getting the brunt of everything. So we'll see. I have resident leaders now with positions at the Resource Center to continue to work towards policy issues or concerns they have, and also to ramp that up and work on water with Crystal Davis next year. So I'm gonna always start there and build a foundation on policy advocacy and not just focus on programs. I like programs, they're important, but we gotta build the policy and the leadership also.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart approach. I see a lot of effort directed at changing people's individual actions and choices. And while that's important and good to do, it's no substitute for collective action. And you can't really push people towards that without education. So I agree 100% that foundation is so necessary.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Melissa. And then we also have a few questions popping up into the chat. So first one for SeMia, could you address the question that Maureen had earlier about why doesn't Ohio have as much renewable support as places out west?
Sure. Thank you for that. Absolutely. In Ohio at this point in time, I think I know we're in a transition. As I talked about in 2013, across the globe, the shift happened as far as renewables being used more across the world. However, in Ohio, we're still dealing with, in many cases, laws that were, the renewable standard was actually rolled back in Ohio. So that as we were moving, like the world was moving with things like moving in the direction of the Paris climate change, and also moving in the direction of renewables and energy efficiency, those things were rolled back. And as a matter of fact, I see a couple friends have up their full repeal of HB6. We now are discovering that part of what happened was actually some appears to be illegal behavior that caused that House bill in Ohio to pass. And as it did, it slowed down our ability to, in Ohio, move as fast as we were at one point, even though it wasn't as fast as other places, to move forward. And so we are grappling with that as a state right now. We're grappling with what happens next. But I think one of the good things is that we at least have an opportunity to come back at it again. Many of us were brokenhearted and disappointed after so much work that this law could be passed and basically bring it to a halt. At this point, there's a lot of conversations going on, and it remains to be seen what the outcome would be. But know that your voices, conversations like this, work that Kim is doing, work that Achilles is doing, and many others on the phone, we have to continue to move forward because the rest of the world is moving forward. I mean, even states that are connecting to us are moving forward in great ways. And we're still in Ohio holding on to some things that we need to change.
Question? Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
SeMia, so in more concrete terms for me, exactly how far or where did you get before all this stuff took place? Because I wasn't paying that much attention to it back then.
Sure.
I'm only aware of it because it hit all the newspapers.
Right.
But where were you at a couple of years ago before so much of the stuff was going on behind the scenes? And also I'd heard something about Lake Erie. There was a project on Lake Erie.
Yes.
Can you go into that a little more clearly? I've kind of forgotten some of the details.
Sure. So the Lake Erie project is, well, there are wind turbines in Ohio, primarily in the southern portion of Ohio. It was a project, and recently there was a great celebration as far as this ability to move forward at least a little bit more. That project, I had actually had an opportunity to work with them very closely. They've been attempting, believe it or not, for 10 years, more than 10 years, to get that project through regulations. But at every step, there's something else that is needed. There's something else that is needed. And most recently, there was an opportunity for it to move forward. But there was a stipulation that they would have to close down for a large portion of the time to take accommodate for bird and bat migration. Well, what that would do is basically kill the project. Mm-hmm. So just recently through, and it's still being discussed. And so that's why I pause, because it's still being discussed. It still hasn't fully been able to move forward yet, but we are making some progress. And again, it's rooted in perception. It's rooted in the current laws that are in place. It's rooted in when you don't know for sure. You have the scientists on one side saying that renewable energy and energy efficiency is going to help us with climate change. And then you have others on the other side that's saying, well, you know, fossil fuels have gotten us this far, you know, we want to keep forward with it. And that's a raging debate. It's a raging debate. And so the best thing that we could do is during these conversations like we're having now, stay aware, stay connected to organizations like Power Clean Future Ohio, watch for updates when there's opportunities, when there's legislation that is before us, reach out to your legislators, let them know what you think, let them know why it's important, and make sure that your voice is heard, both at the ballot and in between.
Can I ask one more question here?
Sure.
Do you know
we're going to go to one of the questions in the chat after this. Go ahead, Brae. go ahead with your next question.
It's an easy question. Do you know, SeMia, do you know what percent of renewable energy Ohio has now, just to give me an idea where it's at? Is it pretty low? The percent of all the energy sources, like 2%, 5%, 10%? Any
You know,
idea?
I'd have to double check that. And I'd open the floor if there's.
3%. It's about 3%.
I was gonna say it's fairly low. I didn't want to misquote it. I know it was less than 5.
What did Rachel say? What did she?
It's about 3%.
3%. Yeah, I knew it was less than 5.
Thank you,
Really
Chris.
low.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay,
It's fairly low.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation, SeMia, and for hopping in there, Rachel. So we have a question from Chad in the chat. How can we guarantee a budget line item for clean energy and lead remediation in the city of Cleveland? And I'll pass that to whoever would like to answer, SeMia or Kim.
Lead remediation in regards to pipes or housing, because those would be two different approaches. Right now we do have a mandate for lead safe housing, and there's money. We're fundraising to meet a goal of 99 million within 5 years, and we're at over 25 right now. It's not for abatement because that's not practical, but it's for lead safe. Every 2 years mandate to supply the certification and keep the homes lead safe for now. And that approach has been done by Rochester, and they reduced lead poisons by 85% with that approach. For pipes, I think I would say Crystal Davis probably would be more of an expert on that, because I know she's advocating for money from the state. But for the city of Cleveland, I couldn't tell you that. I know that we need more testing. We need to understand more about the water quality in the city. But but other than that, I would defer to someone else to talk about that. But that's the infrastructure question, and there needs to be a lot more resources to deal with the lead pipes.
And then we have another question for SeMia. Do you know how or if the recent NEPA rollbacks will impact the LEEDCO project and EPA?
Yeah, I cannot speak to that. I'd have to defer that.
No worries. Are there any other questions that folks have? I know I have one. Okay, so overall, I was wondering, like, for each of you, what is like one thing that you would most like to see to improve energy policy, either around the state or in your own community? We can start with Achilles. You haven't spoken in a while.
Can you repeat your question one more time?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so just overall, like, what's one improvement that you'd like to see in energy policy, either around the state or in your community specifically?
Oh, such a good question. I think just like here in Lorain County, we don't talk about it a whole lot. So that I think more understanding of the policy is needed. Especially I work for an Urban League affiliate. And so we're serving Black and Brown communities every day, but it's not a conversation we're having. So for me, it's more of having an understanding of it in the way that we serve people, because it's not transactional. We're building relationships, and we understand, like right now with something that you mentioned earlier when we started, with utility shutoffs and rental assistance right now in this moment. That's like a big thing that we're focusing on. But we have here in this county, we also have issues with like lead and all of the things Kim was talking about. So there's just not like a huge focus. So that, I know that's not necessarily answering your question, but we need more focus here. And so that's also part of why like I'm joining these conversations to also learn, because there's just not a clear focus from a larger organization, based on my experience.
I would say for me, I would love to see Ohio really take its rightful place in the renewable energy and energy efficiency um, transition, and really step up and have policies that have real transparency to them. So the public trust has been damaged. It's been damaged tremendously. And I would love to see Ohio really step up from a transparency standpoint, an accountability standpoint, to have an economy that's really led by clean energy and also equitable, so that we don't continue to just talk about people of color and disadvantaged communities as, oh, they're the most adversely affected, and then everybody looks sad. But that when we talk about clean energy for all Ohioans, that it truly, absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, is clean energy for all Ohioans, not just, solar, not just wind, but it is actually the jobs too. So often, unfortunately, I've heard and seen, where it's like we can have someone come from another region in Ohio and do the work, but the people who live in the area somehow, it doesn't cash flow if the people who live in the area do the work, but it cash flows for someone to travel from another part of the state. And don't get me wrong, I want all of our clean energy to happen with people in the state of Ohio. So please hear me right. However, there is even an inherent inequity in that we have people who will travel hours, 5, 6 hours to come and do work in Northeast Ohio. And then the people who live in Northeast Ohio could literally walk to the job site, are told, you must go back to training yet again. And in order for you to do the project, it wouldn't cash flow. And I'm a business person. I don't understand how somebody can travel from another part of the state, stay in a hotel, travel back and forth over the weekend, and it can cash flow, but somehow it can't cash flow when it's the people who live in the actual neighborhood who are literally walking by the project to go to training, only for the project to end before they finish the training. And then when the next project comes, they get told again, oh, go back to training. So I would really, if I had a magic wand and we could really change something, love to see Ohio really step up accountability, transparency, led by clean, renewable energy, and equitable for every single Ohioan, not just as victims, but in the wealth creation as well.
Well, not much to say after that. I think
You can handle it, Kim. You can handle it.
that's where the ownership for me happens, meaning that I'm trying to understand, investigate more about the cooperative models, who's owning things in communities. It can translate to renewable energies or solar projects or community solar, or however it needs to look, that they are participatory and receive the benefits of everything, from understanding it to advocating for themselves. I really want to see people learn and advocate for themselves and create their own agendas versus just somebody else's agenda that they don't really understand what's going on. And then the workforce piece is very important, because a lot of times, people are vulnerable because of the state and the money and the poverty issue. So how do we write that a little bit so we don't have to keep talking about a service model, but more of an ownership model, a cooperative model, or whatever? Investigate those types of things that can work. And then when I say that the residents that I'm working with are understanding policy and advocacy on a broader scale and systems change on a broader scale, so that no matter what the issue is, they can tackle it because they have a base of understanding. So we are starting to build a specific infrastructure through the opportunity of the resource center, but I don't understand why we couldn't expand, continue to grow, expand that knowledge, understanding, and connect to policy would, you know, continue to expand the teams so that we really have true engagement. And I think I want to leave with a lot of folks say environmental justice will often leave out the fact that environmental justice includes those who are impacted at the decision-making table and making decisions about what happens in their communities and not just about air pollution. And I think we forget that or just tackle air pollution with environmental justice instead of thinking about the decision-making factor in that definition and who's at the table.
Good grief.
Really good point.
Amen.
Yeah. And then we have time for, I would say, one more like live question if anyone has one, and then a question in the chat that Tracy dropped in.
I do have a question about voting, but I can do it at the tail end.
The other question in the chat is about voting, so go ahead, Marine.
Okay, when I requested an absentee ballot a long time ago when I saw you could get it off the Ohio website, Board of Elections website or whatever. But then because I've been a registered voter for a long time and been voting absentee a long time, maybe 3 weeks later along comes the formal absentee ballot application from my county, Stark County. So that one had my name actually printed on it, and I filled in the exact same information. I sent that one in too. So now I've sent in two, and I'm assuming somebody's going to catch my first one, which just came off the website, and throw one of them away. But I'm wondering, because I wasn't aware I was going to get sent a second one, and I just did it early to be sure I did everything real early. So I'm just kind of wondering if they'll throw both of them out, you know, when I've been voting a long time. Any comments on that?
So I don't have the best answer. I'm not 100% sure on that. I imagine that because you filled it out, that they should catch it. I wish I could say that in confidence about Board of Elections, but there's a lot of stuff going on right now, and they're like being overfilled. But it looks like Jocelyn is helping me out with this question. So it won't be thrown out, but only one will be counted. So you should still get
That's what I want.
a ballot in the mail.
That's what I want.
Yeah, Maureen, the same thing happened with me, and they only counted one.
Good.
Good.
Good. They were checking. They were double checking, right?
Yeah, they only counted one.
Good.
Thank you.
That's what I want. Thank you.
I was going to say, I know in Cuyahoga County, I don't know about Summit, but you can check on the Board of Elections website to see if they've accepted and, you know, they've processed your request too.
Right.
Yeah. If you go to voteohio.gov, there's a tab there for you to be able to check your status, so you can see when it was received, when it was processed, and then after the application,
the ballot will come to you. It'll
Right.
show when the ballot will come to you.
Well,
as well.
I have checked the status. It's kind of inconclusive. Like it'll say no information, you know, weeks. I've checked it a couple times, tried to track it. And it'll say no information, but it does give a date of August 27th, showing that something went somewhere. Yeah. But I'll just take SeMia's word for it that they'll catch it.
Well, no, don't take my word for it. I say call your Summit County Board of Elections and take their word for it. Follow
Okay.
up.
All right. I'll call them. Yeah. Or, okay. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks for clarifying that, guys. I think we have one final question and then we'll wrap it up. This is also for Achilles. From Tracy, if I decide to vote in person on November 3rd and I see something that looks like voter suppression happening, what is the best thing for me to do?
The best thing for you to do is call 866-R-VOTE. That whole number is 866-687-8683. And that is for legal protection, for election protection. So you can just describe to them what's happening and where you at, the polling location you're at, and they will follow up to make sure that issue is getting addressed. I would also say, like, you know, if you can and feel comfortable, advocate for that person. and let them know that there is a resource for them to reach out to instead of just walking away and not being able to vote that day. And you can also call your Board of Elections too. I would recommend that. Yeah. And I also wanted to clear up something. I misspoke when I answered Lynn's question earlier. You don't necessarily, your address on your driver's license doesn't necessarily need to match what you registered with, as long as you are up to date on your voter registration. So when you go to the polling location and they look at your name on your ID, they just want to make sure it's updated itself, so it doesn't need to match.
Yeah, I have a Montana driver's license, so it never matches, but they still let me vote. So yeah, but thank you everyone for joining. That was the final question. We'll be sending out the recording tomorrow, so for folks who weren't able to join at the beginning, you'll still be able to watch the whole video. Thank you everyone, appreciate it.